Order, if we could just all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Flags behind you. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. I just wanted to make a couple of remarks. My name is Tim Harkins. I'm the RSU1 board chair, and we will do introductions around the table before we get started. Just wanted to make a couple of informative or informational comments. This meeting, this public hearing, is part of the state withdrawal process. It's dictated in the terms that the state lays out for us. The interesting part about this and the process, aspects of the process, is when the state said that we need to have this public hearing, basically all they said was the board chair had to convene it. So it was a little bit open as to how we would set it up, how we would structure it, how we were to conduct it once I convened it. So the meeting is now convened, and Peter Osereco and I talked, and we felt probably a good way to conduct this would be I will run the meeting. The mic will be open up here. We ask people to come up. If you have questions, please state your name. If those questions are directed towards the West Bath Withdrawal Group, I'll turn it over to these folks. If it's directed to the RSU Group, I'll turn it over to these folks. Certainly both sides will have an opportunity to comment or add additional information if it needs to be provided. And other than that, I think that, again, we've had a couple of public meetings. This is really just an opportunity for folks to ask questions, try and get clarification about where we are with the agreement or the process. And, you know, as I look out here, I see a diverse group of constituents represented. So I'm expecting a lot of different questions. So that said, I'm going to just turn it over to Peter if there's anything you want to add, and then we'll go around and do introductions.
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight. Before I get started here, we have one new town administrator in West Bath, Adam Garland. If you stand up for just a minute, please. Everybody, please welcome Adam. The voters of the town of West Bath have tasked us, the West Bath Task Force, Administrative Withdrawal Committee Task Force, with putting together the best possible withdrawal agreement that we could present to the public for their consideration for referendum vote. And we have negotiated, we have worked since February, but we've really worked since about October on this meeting pretty much every week. We've worked with the RSU1 committee throughout the process, and we finally come to the end of this journey, and we feel we have put together the best possible agreement we could, given all the circumstances. Kyle Jacobin is going to run us through a Reader's Digest version, touching on the important points of the agreement. We had a meeting last week, public meeting, and we did the same format. The only change that we would ask for this time around is that everybody would please hold their questions until after Kyle is done getting through the summary of the withdrawal agreement. It takes about 20 minutes to get through it uninterrupted. There's a bit of content there. We'll get into what's next and that sort of thing. We'll talk about that later. I think probably we ought to get right into the review of the agreement. I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Thank you, Peter. All right, so if we could just go around the table and make introductions.
Jennifer Rich Smith, RSU1 school board member representing majority of Woolwich and Hurstback.
Bill Perkins, RSU board member representing Pittsburgh and part of North Bath.
Alan Walton, RSU1 board, represent part of Bath and part of Rouseing.
Dave Barber, board member representing north end of Bath and part of West Bath.
Patrick Manuel, superintendent of schools, and Steve August, who is a board member and also was on the withdrawal committee. He's out of the country and couldn't be here tonight, so I just wanted to mention that.
I'm Peter Osarecko. I'm a selectman in the town of West Bath and part of the RSU1 withdrawal committee.
Kyle Coleman, RSU1 board representative for West Bath and also co-chair of the West Bath Withdrawal Committee.
Dennis Cruz, I'm just a parent on the withdrawal committee.
Carol Gillespie from West Bath, a member of the withdrawal committee.
All right, and now I'll turn this over to Kyle, and he'll give you a summary of what is currently in the withdrawal agreement.
Okay, I know we've done this a few times, so I'm going to try to be quick. Some of you may have heard this 2 times. And I'll try to go sort of in the order of the agreement, but I will be skipping certain sections that are either boilerplate standard for these type of agreements to get to what are the important pieces that would be within the withdrawal agreement. Just to note, if you haven't been here for a meeting before, the withdrawal agreement is about West Bath, so you'll notice everything is going to be about what we would do with our children and how that relates to the children of West Bath alone. So starting at the beginning, there's the provisions for educational services, and in this section we have talked about and decided what we would do with our students. The K through 5 students would be still handled through the West Bath school. That wouldn't change. For 6 through 12, the RSU has agreed to be the school of guaranteed acceptance, which means that for the next 10 years, the RSU would accept any and all students from West Bath who wanted to attend. Along with that, we have agreed to allow students who are currently enrolled to continue where they're at. So if there are some kids from West Bath going to another school like Newell or whatever, provisions in this will allow them to continue and finish up to the maximum grade of the school that they're in. Also, in these sections, we set a floor, so to speak, of 75% minimum students that we would guarantee, at least by tuition payment, to the RSU. That would leave 25% of West Bath students to school choice, if they would like to. Then continuing on to the tuition, we agreed to follow the state tuition rate to determine tuition rates for elementary and high school. The only additional add-on was for the 10-year period that we would add a debt service factor of 5% if needed for any new construction and the RSU begins. So that'd be any newly incurred capital debt. special education. We lost some special education, we'll get through that in the sections. Career and technical education, we would, as West Bath SAU, since our students would be tuitions into RSU schools, they would still have the ability to use the VRCTC, continue on for a 10-year period. The only issue added in there is that we would become a member. As we withdraw, we wouldn't be. Then need for construction. In this agreement, we basically stated us withdrawing from the RSU would not cause a need for construction on any part for the RSU or West Bath. Transportation, we thought it's best since we're still in a contract and we agreed to have the RSU serve as guaranteed acceptance school, that we would continue on with our contract and pay 10.57%, which is our share of the current bus contract, and continue that relationship. And then that would be for the first year that the withdrawal would be in place if it was voted. Administration, in the provision, that provision, we would take over the administrative functions, basically transfer administrative functions from the RSU to the new West Bath School Association. We would be responsible for handling all of our superintendent and administrative purposes. Superintendent contract, because we would not be using the RSU1 superintendent, we would no longer be responsible for debts and leases and other financial commitments. Law allows us to mandate that we need to pay those obligations, but it does allow for us to handle those in alternate means other than making debt service payments. We agreed with the RSU that if we withdraw, we would retire that debt by in the means of tuition payments. As we discovered, the state tuition rate takes account for debt service payments currently in there. So by our students tuitioning in, we would be retiring the debt that way, and that would be a means to retire all the debt. That would include the Bath Middle School project, the vocational Morris High School addition, the Bath system-wide renovation project, and the Woolwich Central School project. For the newer $5.2 million bond that was voted, I think it's a bond anticipation note right now. We agreed that we would, if we withdrew, pay all the amounts that were attributed to West Bath. So any work in that bond that's done to West Bath, we would pay that, including any interest. And the RSU would agree to, when they convert this into the next, into the bond, that they would take out less debt. Therefore, we would be responsible for that anymore. Although we would still be liable as we were part of it, and we would continue to help retire that debt through our tuition payments. Lease agreements is the next section, basically talking about equipment leases, technology leases that are currently in place. I would just sum them up in one. We will handle them either by taking over the lease itself, or we'll agree to make the lease payments to the RSU 30 days prior to the payment's due date, and be responsible for any maintenance on those equipment, any service, any ongoing work that needs to be done would become the new West Bath School union's responsibility. And at the end of those leases, the West Bath School union would be able to purchase them, or whatever the terms of each lease contract would be. Central office, since we will not use the central office, we will no longer be responsible for payments on the central office. Legal claims, which I know has been an issue for a lot of people, and we can go over that again. We have all the attorneys here so they can answer those questions. But in here, legal claims, we will be responsible for our share of 10.57% for any expenses, damages, and losses arising from claims that happened while we were within the RSU. So that means it could be slip and falls, it could be anything that's above and beyond insurance claims while we're here. That may come up after the withdrawal to go through. And I know there is some concern about the pending litigation that's between the West Bath town and the RSU and other towns about us being responsible there. There's language in there that we would that says that if the judge remedies us to be outside of that, we would not be responsible under this clause. So that would cover those issues. Again, we have attorneys here, so if anybody has questions about that, Dan, they should surely ask that. Recapture and audit. We agreed that we would be responsible for any amount due from a federal or state authority during the recapture audit period, our 10.57%. And if there was any refund or overpayment, we would then receive that back. Then any bonds that are issued after the, I guess, I'm trying to cover this one easily, I kind of always mess this one up. Financial commitments before and after the withdrawal. If there is an issue that happens, such as the roof blowing off the building before the withdrawal vote happens, we agreed in the terms that the RSU could go out to bond for that service, or for the money to repair that, and we would agree to pay that if we were to withdraw. That is something we would take part in voting on. If the issue happened after the vote, we agreed that we would pay that fully, but we would be the only one voting on it, the rest of the RSU would not. And it's reciprocal, so if something happens to another school during that period after the vote, West Bath would not take part in the referenda, nor would be responsible for that then. Hopefully I covered that correctly. I'm sure one of them will chime in if I didn't. Undesignated fund balance and other funds. Here, the RSU and the West Bath SAU agree that the 10.57% share undesignated fund, whether that's a positive or negative number, would be well, if it's a negative number, it would be the responsibility of West Bath to pay any shortfall at the end of that year, the fiscal year 2014-15. If there's any surplus, then we would get 10.57% of that surplus. Now, teachers, staff retention, and collective bargaining. Here, under state law, we've agreed to continue on whatever collective bargaining agreements are in place for our teachers, and also for any other staff in collective bargaining unions. Further, since we're in a year where we're negotiating every single contract, we've agreed to let RSU1 bargain in good faith in respect to successor contracts, so they will bargain in good faith knowing that we will accept that contract. Possibly it may go past the date of the withdrawal, so if there's a yes vote for withdrawal, we would assume that RSU1 would bargain in good faith to the best of their ability for the contract, and then we would accept and continue that CBA from that point on. If for some reason after the withdrawal and by June 30th there's no agreement made, the West Bath School Union would then have the ability to take over that negotiations and bargain with that bargaining unit itself. You'll also, if you have a copy of the agreement, and I know there were some questions about this, if you do have it, you'll notice the Schedule A and B. Those are not set in stone. We realize those are in flux because of dynamics that change within the year. So there's provisions here that will, if the vote is yes, on June 30th, the superintendent would provide us with new Schedule A's that would be inclusive of what staff actually exists in West Bath at that time. So if you see something that may be a little different, that is not the exact, there is the ability to alter that and capture exactly what the situation is in West Bath. Also, we agree that any workers where they're split, shared, the employee would become either the employee of RSU1 or West Bath, depending on where they work the majority of their time. So if a particular teacher or staff work 60% say in West Bath, 40% RSU1, they would become West Bath's employee, and if it was the opposite, they would be RSU1's employee. Disposition of real and personal property. RSU1 agrees to convey any right title interest to the real property of the West Bath School back to West Bath's school union if the withdrawal is successful. Also, any personal property that is in the building, tables, chairs, books, equipment, that type of thing would remain in West Bath, and it would be West Bath's. And also, RSU1 agrees to allow us any computer files or files that are applicable to the students and that type of stuff that are trying to do this. As far as the transition, there's a section about transition in here. We defined a school board of 5 people, and that vote would happen 90 days after the withdrawal vote. Also, we have put in place for a transition committee so that in this short time between a potential yes vote of withdraw and a new school board being elected, there would be a transition committee that would be appointed that would begin the process of building a budget and policies so that the new school board could have something to work with and they would start at 0. And then from there, a lot of it is just boilerplate and the ability to amend, terminate, how things would be handled if we made changes and stuff in the state. So I'm not going to take us through that.
I think we should wait. Yeah? Okay, thanks, Kyle. All right, so at this point, the mic is open for questions. If anybody would like to come up, again, just please state your name and where you're from and fire away.
This is going to be a short meeting.
Well, I guess our work is out here.
I'm not quite as tall. Can you hear me okay? Jay Wright, I live in West Bath, and I'd just like to ask the committee why they have found, and I'm not of Maine, or as you can tell from my accent, why they feel that it's more important to have control over half of the students and then not have any type of influence on the education from 6 through 12. Anybody?
I'll turn this over to the West Bath group.
That really wasn't a decision for us. That was the citizens who initiated the petition, and that was one of the issues that was on the petition. That wasn't really up to us to decide. The only other option for us to have 100% control is to build a high school, and then we could control that completely. But that was one of the issues. People wanted more local control. This particular agreement gives us some local control additionally that we would not have.
But not for the high school, not for the secondary, but for half of your kids' education years. You have no control because you're going somewhere else.
Well, I mean, yeah, the way the RSU stuff is created anyways, we don't really have direct representation. It's split. So if you're looking for a direct representative that works for you, that doesn't exist now. So there's no representative that represents West Bath's interests in the RSU. We're all split. That's the way that the RSU is created. So if you're looking at it in that respect, you're not really losing that direct representation if that's what you're asking. But this was something that was created by the citizens, not by this committee. We're just responding to the citizens' petition to develop a plan that meets as many of the criteria that we could, which we think we did.
And just to address another similar issue, is that the 6th through 12th graders would, per this agreement, now have school choice. So they could go to the RSU1 schools if they wanted to, but they could also go into another school in the state if they were accepted.
Okay. Other questions?
Terry Lay, West Bath. If our kids are 75% of our kids are going to go to RSU1 for middle school and high school. What kind of impact is West Bath Withdrawal going to have on your budget? I mean, it seems, from the numbers I've been in the previous meetings, so it seems like you're getting essentially less per pupil out of RSU1. It seems like your budget's going to go down. Is that an accurate assessment, or can you address that a little bit?
I'll try and expand on that, or I can turn that over to our superintendent, Patrick Manuel, and he can answer that.
Thanks, Dave. No, our financial analysis, and we have copies here tonight as well, but would be that if West Bath voters decided to withdraw, that it would be about $290,000 to $300,000 that we would lose as a result of this financially. Per pupil, I don't have that.
Out of a total budget of what?
$28 million.
The other thing I can add to that might get at something you were trying to get at, if you look at the per pupil cost versus what the municipalities had been charged in the past couple of years versus what the town of West Bath would be paying in tuition, you're not really comparing one-to-one, because within the state tuition cost, it does include things like special education, it does include things like transportation, it does include things like administration, so that's sort of a base cost, so, okay. Did anyone from West Bath want to add anything? No? Okay. Next question?
Jan Drager from West Bath. My first question, I have several, is for the RSU board. And I think it's valuable to look at how we got into this position that West Bath wants to withdraw. And I think one of the circumstances that I heard was that there were always concerns that this school would be closed, which that is a concern when you're a small community. So, and I, as people would mention that to me, I always said, no, that's not going to happen. And then someone said, well, you read the Harriman report? And so I went to look at that and went, oh. So that we're informed citizens, what are the chances of this school ever being closed in the next 10 to 15 years if we stayed with the RSU?
Hi, in addition to representing Fitchburg and part of Bath, I also chair the Facilities Committee. And it was our committee's responsibility, among other things, to take a look at the Harriman report. We did so. We have not implemented any of their options, which is what you're referring to at the end, other than one option. And we insisted on them adding a fifth option, which was status quo. And the committee has reported back to the board that it is their recommendation that no school be closed. And that's the bottom line with the committee. We have asked the facilities director to start working on a report to the board relative to extending the 5 years was in the bond issue, but extending beyond that with the needs of the various facilities that we have, including all of our elementary schools. Morse is kind of off to the side as it relates to that issue right now, because we're working with the state to move forward with either a new or a renovated Morse High. But all of the other schools, we've asked Dave to move forward with a plan into the future, with vulnerabilities still exist in the physical plants, and come before us with a plan. And our hope is that we will be able to build into our annual budget sufficient resources to address those needs into the future. So that's the answer. We have voted not to close. We have recommended not to close. It isn't on the table.
Okay.
Okay.
So that other question, I have another question that you're sort of talking about too, is as West Bath citizens, we have to look in our crystal ball and decide what's best for us for the next 10 years. And one of the things is looking at what construction costs the RSU will be facing. And what is the feeling of the board as far as new elementary schools being built?
That issue has not been addressed at this point in time, only very superficial discussion, but no plans at this point in time. We're talking about our existing facilities.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Now, my third question is, and I've tried to understand this and I don't get it, but is that my understanding was that at one time, the state subsidies came to the RSU, and then they were credited to each, it was split up and the cost divided. Now, then it was changed so that the state subsidies came to the RSU, and West Bath got 0, but other towns got more. And I don't understand that and would like you to enlighten me. No? Am I wrong?
No, I can take a shot at it, and then I'll turn it over to Deborah. Just to get back to, I just wanted to add something to one of your previous question. The one thing that the RSU has done, and this may have happened prior to the formation of the RSU, is that there were preliminary applications submitted to get Dyke Newell and Fisher Mitchell, which are two of the older elementary schools, on the list for new construction. A year ago, it was my understanding that they were somewhere in the 50s, like number 50 on the list, 50 and 53, something like that. So that is some steps that the district has taken thinking down the road. Okay, with regard to subsidy, there are two types of subsidy that communities within the RSU receive. The subsidy that Arousik and Phippsburg receive are subsidies that are derived from some special education calculation, and those are relatively small subsidies. The subsidies that the town of Bath and Woolwich receive are subsidies which relate to the state sets a number of how much money you need to raise to support your schools. If your community exceeds a mill rate, and I think it's right around 8 mills, if you've maxed out at 8 mills and you still can't raise that minimum amount that the state requires for you to support education in your town, then the state makes up that difference with the subsidy. You are correct in that at one point in the formation of the RSU, those subsidies which the town of Woolwich and the town of Bath receive, and the smaller subsidies that Phippsburg and Arousik receive, had been distributed amongst all the towns to offset the cost for all the towns. When we went through the cost sharing discussion and the changes and the concerns that the RSU had been applying the wrong cost sharing formula, we brought all the communities together, had multiple meetings with representatives, and the decision that was made, although not supported by all the communities, was that those towns that generate subsidy would retain those subsidies. And that's how it's currently structured.
I know.
Okay, now, I don't know if I've addressed it completely, and Patrick, is there
anything more you want to add?
I don't think so. I think you did a good job. They
okay.
have to raise the required mill before the state will give you subsidies, so.
Okay.
Madeline Hennessy from West Bath. I just have a comment. It's kind of hard for me to understand how the city of Bath, with how much river frontage does the General Dynamics plant take up? How the city of Bath can't raise enough money to support education? It doesn't sound right to me.
My quick response to that would be a question for the municipality of Bath. The RSU does not determine how funds are raised for education or how the taxation is done within each community. So unless there's a representative here from the city of Bath, I see some representatives from West Bath, Woolwich, Rouseck, who might want to speak to that. But from an RSU standpoint, it's not something we're involved in. Dick?
One way of describing that, the way the state formula works, the state...
Could you stand up, please? Thank you.
And introduce yourself.
The way the state...
Dick, could you introduce
Oh, I'm
yourself?
sorry. I'm Dick Spencer. I'm the attorney for the RSU in connection with all of this. But I think the answer to the question is that the way the state school funding formula works, you basically have two thermometers, and one thermometer is how much do you raise in taxes when you apply the state's uniform mill rate to the valuation of the community. And then the second thermometer is how much, if you take the total number of students and go through the whole process of the state funding formula, how much under the EPS formula does it take to educate the kids? And the difference, this is an oversimplification, but basically the difference between the valuation formula and the thermometer and the EPS allocation thermometer is how much state subsidy you get. What it must be is that when you apply the mill rate to Bath's valuation, you get a level that's here, and then when you take the total number of students from Bath and apply the EPS formula, you get a number that's up here, and that difference is essentially what the state provides in state subsidy. And that's just the way the whole state funding formula works. So probably the reason that Bath is eligible for a fair amount of state subsidy, to put it in the simplest terms, is they have less valuation per student than West Bath, for example, which must have more valuation per student.
That might answer, but I think specifically, I think her question was, you have this company, General Dynamics, you have a significant amount of waterfront property. Why isn't the city of Bath able to raise the amount of money necessary to fund the required education? And I don't.
And what Bath does is they put an assessment on that property. And then what the state does is they do a ratio study, and they adjust that to 100%, so that it's comparable supposedly from one community to the next. And that's what they use in the state funding formula. So, I mean, that should be based on the valuation of that property adjusted by the state to 100%. It's possible, one could disagree with the valuations, but that's the formula.
Any other questions? Did you want to add to that, Con?
I don't think I can add that much. I think if I'm correct to understand it, I believe the valuation that is on the city of Bath is approximately $990 million. In West Bath is about $340 or $344 million. I don't know if that helps you, but that, just to give you an idea of the valuation.
I always knew West Bath was a really valuable place to live, but I didn't realize it was quite that well.
That I can answer.
Hi, Allison Hepler-Woolwich. And actually, one of the things that, I don't want to get too far into this, why Bath isn't worth more, is that part of General Dynamics, Bath has tax increment financing, right? So they're able to, from what I understand, able to shelter some of that, their valuation. I'm just don't shoot the messenger. So my question has to do with the agreement and amendments to the agreement. This was brought up in the hearing that you held a couple of weeks ago about the tuition for school choice. And as somebody who lives in Woolwich and doesn't have any, I don't have any kids in the RSU, but the idea of the issue of tuitioning, the RSU paying tuition for kids who lived in the RSU going to West Bath, and I just want to suggest that it was a question of fairness about that, and the choice is something that those parents make in deciding to do that. And I think, if the numbers that you provided at the last meeting were accurate, then that means that the rest of the RSU takes a hit, takes a tax increase for that. And so I guess to turn it into a question is, to what extent, this has been finalized, to what extent, if that were to come up again, how would that be determined? Is that considered a substantive amendment to the agreement? I mean, do you anticipate this changing this agreement to allow for the school choice payments for the RSU?
I think probably both parties want to address that. The one thing I'll say, and I was asked to say this beforehand and I didn't mention it, is that the RSU negotiating committee without Steve is going to be meeting with the West Bath committee tomorrow evening to discuss that issue based on some questions that were raised by some folks at previous meetings. So that discussion hasn't happened yet since this agreement has been public, but is going to happen tomorrow. And then I'll turn it over to Kyle, and he can specifically answer your question about if a change were made, what it would look like.
Currently, right now, we have conditional approval from the commissioner, which means that we're in this public hearing phase where we can make changes. So there's the amendment process is what's in here. That amendment process is an agreement is after, if there was a successful vote, if we wanted to amend it. So right now, if we had a change that both the RSU board and the withdrawal committee agreed upon, we could make that change. That change would then be submitted for final approval of the commissioner. If he gave that final approval, that's when it would happen. So this is right now conditional.
Okay.
And so there's still opportunity for us to change it, to get feedback from the public and see if there's things they want, and if that's something that we could do. That's the process we're in right now. So there'll be a moment where this will be final. I think it's November 21st it has to be. Is that correct, Dave? November 21st. At that point, we would have to submit it back to the commissioner for final approval.
So if people were concerned about this school choice thing, would coming to a meeting tomorrow night be the appropriate place to express those?
Anytime between now and the 21st would be the time to.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be at this meeting, like we could just submit? Okay.
Yes, anything.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, we want to hear it tonight. We want to see something submitted in writing, and we want to hear about it tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
I could just comment, the school choice issue at the moment is not a part of the withdrawal agreement, nor is the subject itself an element of withdrawal, but we can address it by including it in the withdrawal agreement.
No, I like the way it is now. I like the way it is now. I do. Yeah.
But we would, assuming RSU1 and the West Bath Withdrawal Committee can put together an agreement as far as school choice is concerned, we can include it in the withdrawal agreement.
So it's still a possibility.
There is. It needs to be completed before the 21st. If it's not, there will not be any governing authority or whatever to be able to address such a topic until we put a new school board in place, which is next year. So that's the urgency for the moment.
Okay, all right, okay.
When and where is the meeting tomorrow?
At the West Bath School, at the West Bath Town Hall, down in the conference room.
What time?
6 o'clock.
Hi, Cameron Jacobs. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I have 4 out of my 5 children here at West Bath, one of which graduated, my 5th child graduated last year. And in contrast, I feel, as I've spoken before, really strongly that the choice students, and we were given a choice through RSU1, and at this point, the choice families have in some ways been dropped. And one, I wanted to advocate for my children and other children that are at West Bath right now and want to stay and want to be part of this community. And I also have a question that my understanding through the amendments of this agreement that there was a time where there was in the agreement a place where the choice students could stay at West Bath, and that was taken out of the agreement. And so my question is, and I've heard about the financial aspect of RSU1 in terms of tuition and paying for the choice students to go to West Bath and what that does to RSU1. However, my question is, if it is in the agreement, does there have to be something that has to say that RSU1 has to pay tuition, or is there a place for the option for having those choice students stay at West Bath and then there being some way to accommodate that? Does it have to be stated in terms of the tuition now, or how does that, is that a possibility? That at least it's open to have those students be able to stay here and figure out what that is with West Bath?
You guys want to take a shot at that?
I think anything is open as far as negotiations are concerned. I think we've stated the committee is open to having a bunch of options available to allow school choice. It's something that we wanted to continue. So from our perspective as the committee, we're open to any language that would do that. Now, the RSU has, the financial issues that come up that they've brought up, and that's a big issue. Apparently, why we can't, we have to work on that.
But I guess my question is kind of, if in the agreement it says that choice students can stay at West Bath, and that in some way that it doesn't state that RSU1 is culpable for that. So is there a way, at this point, I guess my question is, if it's in the agreement, if it's not in the agreement, does that mean that choice students can't go to West Bath through RSU1? I mean, how does that work? If it's not in the agreement, is there...
If it's not an agreement, it's just not in the agreement.
So what happens to that? I understand the financial aspect of RSU1, but what happens to those students in terms of the actual ability to go to West Bath, where it's really gray in terms of what happens?
For the time being, that could very well be interrupted or terminated the way the agreement is setting at the moment.
Well, why does it have to be interrupted? Why can't it be stated that those choice students can stay here and that RSU1 is not necessarily responsible, or there's a way to, it just seems that to leave it out of the agreement completely and not have there be any flexibility of trying to work something out seems reminiscent for those students that, of having interrupted education.
I see what you mean. We could indeed, of course, RSU1 would have to agree, but we could include it in the agreement, but RSU1 still needs to have a policy that it will indeed send students.
So I guess RSU1, why is there not any type of, why is it just cut and dry? Either the tuition has to be paid or it's not even in the agreement? Because that's kind of what I hear from West Bath and from the meetings that I've been.
Kyle, go ahead.
One thing I would say is that maybe we would, to ask the attorneys what because I think you're asking for some open-ended language that wouldn't talk about tuition, and we had proposed some stuff like that, but there was concern about what that would mean as far as liability is that the RSU would be forced to do this by having that language in there. I don't know if that's something maybe the attorneys could answer why that would be left out, that would be better.
I think if I understand what you're asking, first of all, by not having it in the agreement, it doesn't prevent that there may be some side agreement reached between the two parties that would allow this. By having it in the agreement, there's got to be some sort of financial piece tied to that impacts both parties. West Bath has got to receive some kind of income to educate those students, and the RSU is obligated to make some payment to make that happen. I mean, certainly, if there were a situation where, you know, they said, we'll take them and it won't cost you anything, it would be a non-issue. But they need revenue to pay for those kids, and we have an obligation to make those payments. If there was just language,
I don't know, but do you, if I'm saying if you don't, then isn't there a way to have it in there so that those children aren't dropped, at least to have, you know, either meet part way or even have, say, RSU1 say that you will be responsible for a certain amount, and then either West Bath or those families pick that up, but at least have something in there that leaves it open and the ability for there to be something that could be worked with for those students to be able to stay. Or from the state, are there any stipends from the state? Last meeting we heard about stipends given to students that go to charter schools and other schools. I mean, is there a way to get any money from the state to help with that? It just seems like it's cut and dry for RSU1. It doesn't seem like there's a relationship or a willingness to make some type of agreement upon it. It seems like you don't want to have to pay the whole tuition, and I get that, and I get the repercussions of that for the rest of RSU1. But where's the willingness to be open to make some type of agreement that all of the students that are here of choice, that we were given the choice, now would not be able to continue their education here?
I think the willingness is there, and I think the parties plan on meeting again. But I think we walk a dangerous line if we have language that may allow that without being definitive about how we're going to accomplish it. Because it leaves you in the same position. You don't know yet how that's going to get accomplished. Now,
but you've been working with attorneys through this whole thing. I mean, I can't believe that the attorneys couldn't have thought of language that would allow that to be in the agreement and allow you not to be responsible for the whole tuition, but having it in agreement that choice students could still stay here.
I think that, frankly, I think that was something that the West Bath group wanted to have in there. They wanted to have language, and I've stated this at a couple other meetings, they wanted to have language in the agreement that basically said, you know, philosophically, we feel that we would like to see those kids continue to go to West Bath. And I think philosophically, the board has said, we believe that the continuity of that is a worthwhile thing. We can state that here. We didn't feel that it was, we felt it was, the board felt it was deceptive to put that kind of language in an agreement if we didn't have the substance to support that statement. So whether an attorney comes up with language, or West Bath comes up with language, or the board comes up with language that says, hey, we believe this is a good thing, the hurdle we have to get over is how do we accomplish that good thing, but also looking at it in the context of what do the rest of our constituents feel, and how does that impact the district. So I think coming up with the language, it's something we discussed, and you know, it's something that's come up at the table. There'll be more discussions tomorrow night about possible ways to achieve this, but I think unless we come up with a hard and fast way of how we're going to accomplish it, and it boils down to dollars, the language really doesn't do anything for you, because you don't know whether that's going to happen or not going to happen. And it doesn't do anything for us, because We don't know whether we can do it or can't do it.
So I guess also in terms of the agreement, West Bath, if there's nothing in this agreement and it comes to vote and it passes, what is the willingness or where are you in terms of accepting students that aren't West Bath residents?
We'll take them.
And how will you take them? What will enable you to take them? What do we as choice parents, as choice families need to do to be able to stay here and be part of the West Bath community?
Once this agreement goes out on the 21st, at that point, it can't be changed by us. We'll lose our authority to do any kind of negotiations like that. And the next opportunity for that would be directly school board to school board.
But isn't that what the meeting is tomorrow night?
No, the meeting, there is no actual West Bath school board though, yet. Right now, we do have the authority to talk about it and make any deal, but once.
So then you can go back and talk as a withdrawing school with its own school board. You can go back to RSU1 or go back to the school board.
Well, I think there's nothing that prevents two school boards from making any kind of tuition agreement that they want to make. So if something doesn't happen by the 21st, the issue isn't necessarily dead because the two school boards can choose to reopen it as soon as West Bath would have a school board if this withdrawal actually goes through.
And what is the timing of that? I mean, in terms of for next year and the continuity of education for our children here,
Right.
How does that work in terms of timing for the next fall?
Right, that's the tricky part because there's the vote would be in January, and then if that passed, there would be scheduling of a school board election, a special election for the school board. Was it 90 days? Yeah. So within 90 days of that, the school board would be elected. And once they were elected and installed, so you're looking at the earliest, late March, early April, to begin to reopen the issue.
And in terms of RSU1, you're talking about having, I think it was 27 to 32 students from West Bath that would be influxing into the RSU1. When or how do you figure out if they're not able to be here, how do you figure out where you have space and fit them into the other schools or the school of choice that we're supposed to have?
I'll let Patrick address that.
I mean, by policy, I mean, the students would have a right to go back to the community school where they live, as well as our school choice policy that the board has that talks about the process of, by May 1st applying for school choice and the principals and the directors getting back to parents by June, for the school choice issue.
So how does that work when you have such an influx all at once in terms of class size and availability in terms of classes and how to get?
Those are some of the details that, we need to talk about. Tomorrow night's meeting is more to get a handle, maybe have preliminary discussions about school choice students and options that might exist between the two groups. And once we, know more about a direction that we're going to go in, we've had some preliminary discussions of how we would best handle that and what options we would have.
I think as, again, a large family, part of West Bath community, and I know other parents are here, we also have to manage our children's expectations of, where they're going to school and if they can't be here, why, and what that means and what that looks like and when. So we're talking about, possibly knowing that we can't go here and then not knowing because of the numbers of an influx of going into the community where they are able to go. And I think that's a pretty stressful situation when you're talking about young students. Thank you. I just wanted to be an advocate.
I just want to add, just to kind of put it in perspective a little bit, at our next board meeting, which I think is this Monday, at the Phippsburg School, we've got a situation where there's a classroom that exceeded policy size for the RSU. So we've had to hire another teacher and are bringing another teacher in to accommodate. So part of what you're asking, our response would be determined by what it is that you chose to do as a resident of Phippsburg. If you came to the RSU and said, next year I want my child at the Phippsburg school, and there was an influx of 5 third graders, then the board would look at that, we'd talk with the administrator, we'd see what the impact was to the classroom. Do we need to hire another teacher? Do we have space to accommodate? And that sort of starts the ball rolling. So the decisions that we would make, and I don't want to speak for Patrick or the administrators, but the decisions that our superintendent and the administrators make are oftentimes dictated by what it is you choose to do as a parent.
So if we, because we're possibly, I'm hoping not, I'm saying possibly because our wish is to stay here, if for some reason that is not able to happen, is it possible that you ask us as choice parents that are here for those applications sooner than later, that you can start that process rather than May, where then we don't hear until late, August, or to be able to help figure out where these students are going to go and help that process? I mean, you're talking about an influx, so you don't know obviously where the choice or where those students are going to go. And so is it possible to start that process earlier because of the situation?
We certainly can, and again, I'll let Patrick speak to it, but at this point, we don't even know what the outcome of the vote is going to be.
Well, I understand that. I'm talking about, if for some reason we as choice families cannot be here. And I'm talking about looking forward and trying to be proactive, of not sitting back and waiting something to happen and then thinking, oh, what do we do now? If, putting something in place that if this were to happen and this were to happen, then what do we do with these 32 students that are now influxing into RSU1? Can we accommodate, or can we work with the families or work in a different schedule than we usually have for each year to be able to figure out where we can fit them and where we can put them, or where they want to go?
Yeah, again, I would echo what Tim said. It's about timing. I mean, right now, take your specific case, Pittsburgh, you would have every right to have your children go to Pittsburgh Elementary School. And as Tim said, if we had an influx at Pittsburgh from resident students, then we would address that. As far as our school choice policy right now, I mean, I didn't bring it with me tonight, but there's about 10 or 12 bullets on there that talks about if somebody wants to take advantage of school choice, that it would not increase our class sizes above our class size policy and would not increase costs, those types of things. So that's a policy that, if the board chooses to revisit as a result of a decision that's made by voters possibly, that could be a consideration by the board.
Okay. Patrick, can I have a real quick thought? I do know that the school choice forms are available for next year now.
Yeah, I mean, anytime.
Is it possible to set up a conditional category for the parent, for this particular group of parents to have separate consideration so that they can get on the list, because it is first come, first served, they could get on the list now and that way not lose their position by having to scramble in March or April? Is that something that could be possible?
It's possible.
Without exercising it if the withdrawal doesn't go through. So, just something like that maybe?
My forms are already in with a
Ours are too.
With a letter in, with a note in it, so it's already been put in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Charlie, come on up to the mic, please.
Good evening. My name is Charlie Durfee, and a while back I was in that seat over there. But good evening. Couple things. The tuition question is very interesting. I'm from Woolwich, by the way, not West Bath. Speaking as someone from Woolwich, it would be I would think it would be very difficult to willingly want to pay to have kids from RSU towns go into a new West Bath school, especially if it's to the tune of $500,000 or something like that, which is one figure I saw reported. That it would be a really big hit, and it obviously would detract from what the RSU was trying to do. It also would be a dangerous precedent. So if another town decided to split away, then would the RSU again be paying for tuition to those children choosing to go to that newly split away town? So you can see it, you have to look, take a look down the road a little further than just today or tomorrow. Also, so on another tact, I picked up the budget estimate for West Bath School if it were a standalone district, and I'm not presuming to point out things or suggest things to people from a town that I don't live in, but I'm just curious to know how these were derived. I read quickly through some of the rationale for the line items, which comes up, I think, on the second or third page. It's that table 2. And it just strikes me that it's a very sketchy preliminary budget. And it's to really tell you the true story of what it's going to be like being a standalone district. I would refer you to the experience in Wiscasset, which just recently broke away. Their budget went up $2 million, a very large percentage of the overall. And they have middle schools and high school already. Georgetown chose not to join the RSU back when in 08. And they have, last I looked, which actually, frankly, was a few years ago, but I don't think it's changed very much, but their per pupil costs as a standalone district are the second highest in the state. Only North Haven was higher. I just really would encourage you to very deeply delve into these numbers, because back when the RSU was being formed, the promise was, and the premise was that the RSU would both increase the educational quality for the students, primarily by getting the old Union 47 towns who were able to have direct influence over the middle school and the high school instead of just tuitioning their kids there. And then there were several other things that really elevated, in my mind, the educational experience of the children. So that was the premise number 1. Premise number 2 was that it would be done at a cost savings. And it did that too. And it did it mostly from economy of scale. From instead of having 100, 200, 300 students in your district, as we did in Woolwich, to 2,200 or whatever is now in the RSU. There's a real economy of scale there, and it matters. It really matters in central office. It matters in transportation. It matters in special ed. It matters in all kinds of different ways, which I frankly don't see a very careful analysis. So I'll get off the mic and maybe somebody can answer those questions. Thank you.
Somebody from West Bath?
Feel free.
I'm not entirely sure where the question was in that, but as far as the numbers in that table, through the process, we were definitely cognizant of what had happened in Wiscasset and what their situation was regarding what their estimates were and what actually happened there. We engaged the services of the consulting firm that produced this report, and for developing these numbers, there were 2 basic methodologies depending on which part you're looking at. One was, and this is, to understand, this is not a predicted budget. This is a reflection of the current school year had West Bath not been a part of the RSU. Slightly different question. You get close to the same answer, but it's not meant to reflect next year's budget, as opposed to what our share of this year's budget is. So when you look at that, a lot of the line items here, for instance, instruction, student and staff support, a bulk of the school administration, maintenance, those are directly from the West Bath portion of the RSU budget. The RSU budget format is broken down by site, and we took as a baseline the current year's site numbers for those categories. There were a few categories that are not directly part of the West Bath page of the budget. And those would be things like central office, the special ed, the transportation. And for those, we tried to decouple what West Bath's share of those services would be and make that the line for that particular item. And then that was for the K through 5 as well as the central office portion. The middle school and high school are very fixed and well-known costs because they're using the state funding formula or the state tuition formula to develop what the tuition per student is, and those are accurate as of the current year as well. So all of the numbers are based off of the current RSU budget, so that we would be able to have an apples-to-apples comparison. Does that answer your question for how they were developed?
Yeah, thank you, it does. I really worry that you're not, it sounds like you took, I'm sorry, I don't want to go over the mic just yet. It sounds like they just basically took the West Bath's percentage, whatever, 10-point-something%, and subtracted that, or multiply that times the total, say for central office, and that became your total for the central office? Because you're not going to hire a superintendent for 10%.
No, we started with that for those particular items, but you still had to ask, is that a reasonable expectation? Is that number actually reasonable? Does it pass the choke on your milk test? And so for things like central office, that number seemed a little small, and so we did, make some modifications behind the scenes but just for those items that were not directly attributable to this school, that were part of the more centralized costs.
And there were some directly like transportation, because the contract actually says we'll pay 10.5%.
Right.
So that number is 100% accurate. It's not even debatable because that's what the cost is in the agreement. So there are places where they're actually accurate to what it is. The tuition rate that we would pay is going to be exactly what it is, depending on what students. So that could change by students. And the transportation is going to be, it's what's defined in the agreement, so that number is accurate to what it is. Things like instruction, we took the costs that were associated with our school as far as our teachers' instructions, which is not just an estimate of 10.5%, 10.57%. That's actually what we're paying for those teachers based upon those contracts. So we took those current numbers in 2014 and 15 and took those. So there were some places where we had to make some assumptions, but in things like instruction and those kind of items, they're pretty defined. So we're not really making a lot of assumptions there. And there are places where we had to, because we don't know. As far as superintendents, as you said, that is up in the air, but that's also a decision that if this withdrawal goes through, this town would have the option to elect a school board and define what that means. That could be a shared, that could be outsourced. And we looked at, part of our exploration while we were negotiating was to look at Brunswick as an option. We did look at that as an option, and they have the ability, because they're working with other towns, to offer their central office services to us. And so we use that as a metric as, can you do it? So no, we may not hire a superintendent for $100,000, but we may outsource for a lot less, because there's openings in some of the communities where that could happen. So for us we could have said, okay, well, we'll hire, or we'll look for a part-time, but that would be making a lot of assumptions on our part where we don't have the authority to do that. So we could make an assumption and go down one road and that be completely not what the town decides to do if they withdraw. So what we try to do is come up with a number that we thought could encompass something realistic as possible, knowing that this town could vote for a budget much higher or much lower. It is possible we could withdraw and the town decide that they would like to increase the teachers by twice as much and hire the most expensive superintendent, and we could have a $5 million budget. And it will have nothing to do with the numbers that we come up with. So a lot of those questions are going to be defined on what this town decides to do after the fact. And to compare, I mean, I do take objection to the Wiscasset thing because you're looking at a lot more moving parts. That would be like if you were questioning Bath leaving the RSU with, we have a K through 5 school. And you know, you're talking about one school, one facility. You're not talking about multiple facilities with, you know, 3 or 4 times the amount of instructors and students. So the amount that we would be off by, it doesn't seem realistic to compare the two, although we did consider it. I don't think comparing what happened in Wiscasset to what could happen here if we make the error would be the same. I can't think we would miss it by $2 million unless we start to gold plate our school.
Okay, other questions? Either one of you, there's plenty of time.
Thank you. I'll be brief. My name is David Strelnick. I live in Bath. Just 3 thoughts building off of this question on the transition for the current students that I'll offer real briefly. You all know I have a wider set of opinions and inputs, but that's not necessarily for tonight. So 3 thoughts. One about the question that's being raised about the transition plan for the kids that are here currently, right? The kindergartners through 4th graders from any of the towns that would be affected by having to dislocate and go to a different school, or if they're, as was expressed by some West Bath parents, if they're here, having their kids and their school system, you know, disrupted, all of that, which may involve tuition issues, but may not. I mean, that's one of the points. I was in a set of communications with the commissioner's office this week where this topic came up, and it was interesting. I just want to offer this for reflection in the task at hand by the 21st, which was, it sounds like it's murky, not whether the withdrawal agreement needs to address the transition of the kids from other towns, because they clarified verbal, even though the written language is murky on that, the verbal clarification was pretty clear. But the next paragraph gives the commissioner the discretion and the obligation to address the orderly transition of education of all the children that would be affected. And it sounds to me like we don't have an orderly transition plan for all the children that would be affected. So they said, well, yeah, we'd be interested in hearing, maybe we'd be interested in hearing input on that from whomever. So I'm just offering that to everybody at the table. It was an interesting set of communications without any clear resolution. The second thing I wanted to offer is that as a personal reflection, you know, there's 3 issues at play here that are all very intimate to me. One is the self-portraits of the kids behind the table, including 2 of my children, right? You know, these are kids, some of whom are playing in the library next door, and the very short-term implication for them of having their life disrupted in this way, right? So that's something that is profoundly important that's on the table here, right? Alongside the long-term planning issues that have been brought up and then longer-term implications, one of which is financial, also intimately close to my heart, and the other is the question of the role of the schools in the fabric of our communities, right? I mean, what roles do the schools play, and all of these relationships in weaving together who we are as a set of towns and people. And all of that, you know, is worth some investment, obviously financially and otherwise. So I wanted to offer that. You know, I hear all 3 of those conversations going on, and we hear comments from one side or another, but I think in my head they're always being balanced. The third thing is just for our friends from Woolwich and elsewhere, but thank you for raising the comments. I guess my understanding is, you know, the numbers in the tuition question aren't at all clear. And there was unfortunately some miscommunication about them given how the public documents rolled out prior to that board meeting a month ago. And we all sort of suffered from the disruption as a result of that, right? But one is the $500,000 number is highly simplified and makes some radical assumptions that we should work through, right? And that's one of the things we heard the last couple sets of meetings, I think. We heard about several possible new sources of money that could be on the table. Some of it coming possibly from the RSU, aimed at whatever that, what is now being called the $500,000 number actually is. Some of it voiced by some of the West Bath folks who've talked about whether in fact they would, in this near-term period, just the transition for the current students, would they in fact realize a substantial cost hit of that degree. And there were a couple suggestions about private money that could be contributed to the pot. So in terms of everybody's thinking, I just want to remind us all that there's some willingness and some spirit out there to sit down and pencil through all this stuff and see what the real number really is. So thanks for the chance to talk for these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dave King. I'm a selectman in Warwick. I just want to share a personal story. When I first moved to Warwick in the mid-'80s, I had a daughter that was just, she was in the 7th grade at Bath Middle School. At that time, Bath was not part of our Union 47. So when we moved to Warwick, technically she should have gone to 1 year of school in Warwick, the 8th grade, and then come back to the middle school for the 9th grade. Well, she didn't want to do that, and her mother and I sat down and we decided that it was not in her best interest to do that. So we didn't go to the school board and ask for them to pay the tuition or anything. We wrote a check. And there's a very simple way for all of these students to go continue in West Bath, and that's for the parents to do the same thing. I don't know how I can explain to an elderly couple living on a fixed income that if West Bath leaves the RSU, it's going to leave Warwick in a position of paying 25 to 30% of the budget. And I don't know if it's a $500,000 number or a $300,000 number. I don't know how I'm going to explain to some elderly couple living on a fixed income that their taxes are going to go up $50 to $100 this year because students, 27 to 32 students, have been granted out-of-district tuition. You can't grant that to everyone. We know that. The RSU cannot afford to let every student in the RSU choose to go to Wiscasset, Waynfleet, Cheverus, or whatever, and the RSU pay for it. There's no way we can expect West Bath to take students without being compensated for that. There is a cost to educating those students. So somebody's going to have to pay the tuition. I just don't think it's fair for the towns, for this group of students, and I understand their disruption, and I feel bad for that, but I don't think it's fair for the taxpayers of all the surrounding communities to have to shoulder the bill for a privilege that will be granted to 27 to 32 students that isn't granted to every student. So the Warwick Board of Selectmen has talked about this, and we are strongly opposed to having our cost go up to grant this special exception to this number of students. Thank you.
Other folks? Sir?
I'll go
I guess I sympathize with some of these people from outside of West
Would
Bath.
you just-
I'm Lonnie Fitzgerald from West Bath. And I sympathize in a way with the people from Woolwich and the Rouse or whatever. But by the same token, I sympathize with the people from West Bath. Now, if the people from these other towns would like to have their students come here, then I think we should have it done. And I think it should be done fairly easily. And I don't understand the big problem. Now, I know the whole problem seems to be strictly funding. RSU1 doesn't want to lose the funding. But if the students went to a private school from RSU1, you'd lose the funding because the state would not reimburse you for those schools, for those students. So when you're saying, okay, it's going to cost Woolwich more or Rouseat more because the students have gone, well, they might be gone because they might go somewhere else. They might not come to West Bath, and they may not go to Bath. So I think you're making an issue over something that should never be an issue. The other thing that I don't understand, it's probably just because I'm dumb, but if the students that were going to Bath, say, went to West Bath, you would lose the funding, all right, or you should lose the funding from the state. And so I don't see why the state wouldn't be picking up the cost to go to West Bath schools. And it wouldn't be coming out of the RSU1 budget directly, but it'd be money that you would never get in the first place. So explain that to me.
Patrick? I'm really not sure of the question. Dick, did you catch that? Do you want to address it?
I don't know if I can really answer it, but the question was if these kids didn't go to RSU1 at all and the parents paid tuition for them to go somewhere else, you would lose the state subsidy for those students. And so the question was, since if that happened, you'd lose the state subsidy, why is it a problem for you to get the state subsidy and then pay tuition to West Bath? I think the answer to that goes back to kind of fundamental economic principles, which is that it's the difference between a marginal cost and a average cost. If the students stayed in RSU1, RSU1 would get the state subsidy for those students and would be able to fit those students probably into its existing schools and classes without incurring very high additional costs. If those students left the district, RSU1 probably wouldn't be able to reduce its costs by that much because it would only be, a couple of students in a few students in each grade. So it depends what you're comparing it to. You're right. If the students went entirely to a private school somewhere, RSU1 would lose that money in terms of the state subsidy for those students. But if what you're comparing is what happens if the students they're in RSU1 and they go to school in RSU1 compared to what happens if they live in RSU1 and RSU1 pays tuition for them to go somewhere else, that's a big difference, and that's the number that you're describing.
If I may, are you talking like charter schools or are you talking private schools? Because if you're talking charter schools, it's 100% loss.
Private schools specifically, because that makes a nice clean point. Charter schools are a little different. If the students went to a private school, then obviously the state is going to reduce the budget for RSU1.
That would be the same for charter schools as well, that's what we're just clarifying.
Okay.
In charter schools, the amount that you would get would go directly paid to the charter school, so that would, and that's why I was just clarifying. I didn't know what you meant.
Can I speak now?
Yep, please.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Bodish, and I live in West Bath. So I'm hearing lots of people from Woolwich come up and tell us how it's a dangerous precedent to set standards for our school to leave the district and let what I might say are some of the brightest and best schools in our district not come to West Bath and reduce the quality of my child's education. Now, question for you. When the RSU was formed, did West Bath taxpayers contribute to the completion and building of the Woolwich School? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. Next point. Going forward from this agreement, I see this big number, 75% to RSU1. Is that correct or not? Yes or no?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so you people from Woolwich need to understand your hand is still in my pocket as a taxpayer. And I want the kids that are from Bath, from Woolwich, from Phippsburg, from wherever, to come to their school and to participate in our school, which is a community like no other. It is tough to get into this school from outside towns. There are many people standing here contemplating moving because they have no place to go once we shut our doors. I don't want that to happen. And you are still gonna get my tax dollars, whether I like it or not.
I think just, yeah, one thing I wanted to clarify. The Woolwich School project was a state-funded project. So I don't remember what the percentage was,
So we
but...
contributed no money whatsoever to the Woolwich.
No. You have, and I said yes.
Just saying that.
But if it
We
just-
paid in, and we're
Correct.
still gonna pay in. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And this can be worked out.
I just want to say, we're not closing our doors, so.
I understand that.
I
And
just
I
wanna be
think
clear.
West Bath as an entity and our people in this town want to continue it that way, but I see so many roadblocks getting thrown up.
I just
and
wanted
it
to say
is
that.
Very
we
frustrating.
weren't closing our doors, I just want to make that clear.
Thank you.
If I could just make a quick comment.
Sure.
Ma'am, people in Fort Kent paid for the Woolwich School. People in Kittery paid for the Woolwich School. People in Woolwich paid for the new school in Yarmouth. They are state funded. Everybody in the state pays for the schools.
But I'm still paying 75% going forward, so there you go.
Okay, anyone else? I hate to end it on that note.
I'm a fighter.
I agree with a lot of what she said. Hi. Lou Ensel, resident of Bath. 2 children who go here to West Bath. And yeah, I think where everyone gets caught with all the numbers, there's a lot of preliminary numbers out there. I think you were clear last time, just putting the choice aside, if West Bath leaves RSU1, all of us from the towns of RSU1, your taxes are going to go up. I mean, the cost is going to go up somewhat. Was it 300,000? I think 319.
290.
290. And then when you talk about the choice kids, there was tossing around a number about 225,000. But you just have to also really keep in mind that, while yes, my kid will remain in RSU1, I'd say maybe 25% of all those kids who go to West Bath, if they can't, will be homeschooled, will go to private school, will go somewhere else. So you're not going to get the 225,000 back into RSU1. It's just not going to happen. And it really is. I mean, this brings up other issues, because as much as there are great charter schools out there, that's an issue with charter schools. It's why, in some respects, it undermines the public school system, because the money goes away from a public school and goes to a charter school. I'd like to see the kind of things that charter schools are doing in our RSU1 schools, and I know you are all working on things like that. That's what we have here at West Bath. It's an expeditionary learning school. It's one of the things that makes us great, with Emily Thompson and her wonderful staff that make this school great. And there has to be a way to work this out, because, again, as David Stronik said much more articulately than I could, we are all one community here. And so there has to be a way to work this out, because, again, while everyone's so worried about what this money is and how things get grandfathered in, you're talking about 1 year and it drops dramatically every year after that if all you're doing is grandfathering in. What I'd rather see is that kids are coming here because it's an expeditionary school and it's more open, and RSU1 works something out if West Bath becomes its own. And people are going back and forth, and that Dyke Newell, if Dyke Newell and Fisher Mitchell are able to become K-5 again, gives them more of an ability to I don't know, maybe they'll be the performing arts, maybe they'll be science and math, I don't know, but then kids will want from West Bath will want to go there. And that would be great. Wouldn't it be great if we had things like that? And if we thought outside the box and really make something happen. So please keep an open mind, and tell me again, there's a meeting tomorrow?
Tomorrow night at 6 o'clock.
And that's specific to?
Choice.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Come early.
So one of the things that I didn't say, but I want to say to everybody here, is that I don't want I'll just say this, I don't want West Bath to withdraw, right? Because of the things that I've just heard, right? That this is a really important community and it's a really important part of the RSU. So I'm hoping that we all, maybe not one big happy family, but a workable family, right? So I'm actually hoping that the residents of West Bath choose to stay, so.
Thank you.
So I just have a couple things as well. First,
Could you
I'm
introduce-
Andrea Babinwood from North Bath, and two of my kids go here. Their faces are back there too, and they've known about this for a while, and they've shed a few tears, and I'm going to let them tie themselves up to the front door in September if this happens, because we're going to refuse, but we'll be part of RSU1, really. If this happens, we won't go away. But I too was a little concerned when I saw these numbers. I run a large residential program and have a very large budget myself, and my budget's pages and pages. I didn't see anything about capital improvements. There's no nest egg. You said if the roof caved in, you'd have a bond or something, but to wait for that, where would the kids go? I don't know. If I was a West Bath resident, I'd be a little concerned. You need new doors. So that'd be capital improvements and things that, the numbers just kind of seemed a little screwy, as he said to me too. So if I was a West Bath resident, I would want more detailed numbers before I was voting. So just to put that out there, because lots of people have, from West Bath have said so many fabulous things for the Choices family. So I really want to speak out for the West Bath residents and for the West Bath school, because this school means so much to me and my children. And I'm really, really concerned about what's going to happen to this school and all the great teachers that are here. They're no longer going to have the RSU behind them. They're going to be taken away from that. Does that mean they're going to be on probation again? What's going to happen to those teachers? And are they fearing their job? Because they could be fearing that they're going to have to leave. There's going to be a new school board. What if they're on probation again? This school is great because of those teachers and because of Emily. So I can't imagine. So maybe my kids won't be here next year, but your children from West Bath are going to be here, and they may not have those teachers. My daughter cried last year. One of the teachers is here for days because she no longer had that teacher. At night, she came downstairs and she was like, I miss her so much. I just want to see her. Can you please send her a message? But next year, what if we don't have those teachers anymore? Because you're going to pull them away from this strong RSU. So you need to think about when you vote next, in November or January, whenever it is. It's not about the money. It's about what makes this school so wonderful, and it's the teachers, and it's the community, and it is, all of that. It's not the money. So be thinking about the teachers and everything else that makes this school so wonderful, please, when you vote.
I'd like to address that. The teachers would retain their contracts, so their service would stay intact. That's in Schedule B. So that the teachers would, years of service and stuff would remain the same. So that's not a concern. As far as the maintenance, if memory serves, the RSU puts away $25,000 a year for capital improvements. If we have an issue, we bond it. So if you're asking us to put something in the budget, I don't know how much you would ask us to put in there. I think we currently have about 250,000 or 200, somewhere around that range. I mean, someone could clarify currently right now in RSU1 for that. So if comparatively speaking, you would like us to put something away, I think you could add 40,000, which I believe is the amount that we used to contribute annually to capital improvement prior to the RSU1 and School Union 47. So if you want to increase it by 40,000, that would be what we did before the RSU, and that was kept the school in the condition that it's still in very good condition going forward and without debt. So if you would like to increase the numbers by that to cover that, I'm sure that would be a fair way of doing it. But we, again, didn't want to make assumptions that a school board would do. We wanted to look at what it costs to run the school in 14-15. There is a maintenance budget in there, so we use that. I guess we could take the 10.57% of 25,000 and add $2,500 or something. I guess I don't know if that addresses that issue.
Yeah, I mean, what we didn't put in there were things like the standing funds that, that part of the agreement has us divvying up. But for this, that was sort of off on the side because that didn't contribute directly to the running of the school.
Right. It really wasn't in the budget that we compared, that these numbers compare to, so therefore they pretty much are left out.
David Hennessy, West Bath. Just remind people that for many years, West Bath was able to run a fine school all by itself. We weren't part of RSU1. We put in $40,000 a year extra for maintenance of the school, and we have a very fine maintained school. RSU1 has not had to dump a lot of money into the school over the years. There has been RSU1. And kind of a sour note, people talk about taxes and how their taxes may go up. When RSU1 was founded and voted by all the communities, there's a full 1/3 funding formula. And it was going to be run for 3 years, and then changes needed as they had to be changed. No one seemed to object too much. The RSU1 Board of Directors did change for 1 year when they realized they made a mistake in how they were doing the funding. It was costing West Bath an extra $400,000+ a year. No one seemed to care about those taxes. And if you apply $400,000 to one town, an extra $400,000 to one town versus $300,000 or $400,000 to 4 towns, there's quite a difference on how it affects our taxpayers.
Some of us are on fixed incomes too, or would like to be. But
Would you like to, you're welcome to step up to the mic if you want. Yep.
Just Madeline Hennessy from West Bath. Just a point, I feel sympathy for people who are elderly and on fixed incomes. I would like to be on fixed income, but right now it's more important for me to work because I have to pay my taxes in West Bath. So I'm elderly now, but I still work. I'm looking forward to the day when I can live on a fixed income.
Okay, anyone else?
Patrick from West Bath. I just want to make 2 points. Well, one point to start with is that no one from West Bath has yet to mention the money. It's people from not our town. And my other point I want to make is that I'm willing to pay more in taxes to break away. And I would pay to keep the choices students here as well. But I just want to say it's our money, it's not your money. Don't worry about our budget.
Can I say one thing? I wrote a note about it. Someone had brought up representation. I forget, I think it was you, man, who brought that up. And one thing we look back at, the best we could do to look back when we were alone was Union 47. At that time, our kids went to Bath and we had 0 representation. So we would really be going back to that reality, well, as much of that reality as we could. That's what we heard from the citizens, that people liked having that choice and having that control, and knowing they're not going to get 6 through 12. They didn't have it then and they were okay with it. So you know, that's what we used as that reference. I forgot to mention it when you brought it up, but we didn't have representation there either.
Anyone else?
My name is Bob Brown, and I belong to West Bath. I guess I'm the reason you're all here, because I started the petition. And I have to look at what's been accomplished. And the 4 points that were made in this presentation that was, or the letter that was sent out to all West Bath people, about reducing costs for West Bath without reducing quality, increasing the town's control over both budgeting and governance of West Bath School, restore school choice, and then minimize the impact of families, students, and staff at West Bath. I'm very concerned about that last item. I've heard a lot tonight about the impact. It was always my understanding that there would be, everybody would be grandfathered. And it turns out that in a lot of cases they're not. I would hope that in the coming meetings that we can get to a point where we can settle that issue, because I think it's important to those students. It's a good school. I think that people like to come here, and I think that in the stewardship of West Bath, it will continue to be run very well. And I particularly want to thank the group that did this. It was a lot of work for them to do it, and I really appreciate their efforts on my behalf. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else like to add something? No? We're coming up on 8 o'clock. This is the one scheduled public hearing that we have. I think if so required, there will be others. Those people who have concerns about choice, I would encourage you to come to the meeting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, be at the West Bath Town Office. Is there anything anyone up here would like to add?
The only thing is we do have one.
Go ahead.
We have one other mandated public forum that'll happen after the finalization. If we get final approval, if and when we get final approval from the commissioner, there will be a final public hearing at that point, which would be the final copy of the withdrawal agreement. We've talked as a group, and we decided we probably would have an additional one because of the timing. It would be most likely before Christmas, somewhere. I think that's what we had said.
Tentatively, it's December 18th, but if the commissioner wants changes in
that could change
and everything.
So tentatively, we would have one December 18th on that final one, depending on any changes. But we've also talked that we would have one in January prior to the meeting again. So we at least plan to have at least 2 more, and possibly more if necessary, maybe 3, depending on how it goes. But there's definitely one in statute, and that would be in December, just so everybody's aware. And if there's a lot of people, I don't know if we may have to move venue tomorrow to the fire station. We're discussing that.
I may do that anyway.
So look at the West Bath maybe website or something. Can we put it up there for tomorrow's meeting if you're going to show up? Because if we have too many people, we may not be able to fit them in the town hall, so we may go to the fire station, but we'll make sure we post that so that people are aware.
Anyone over here? Okay, again, I want to thank you all for coming. I'd just like to say that, this has been a long process. This has been a challenging process. I think for both sides have put a lot of work into this. And it's, this is community driven. And whether we're talking about the West Bath School or we're talking about an RSU1 school, I think we're all here concerned about the education of the kids and trying to do what's best and trying to, contend with that balancing act. And from the RSU side, one of the challenges that we face is this is not a decision that the RSU1 board is making. This is a decision that the town of West Bath is making, and we've tried to be respectful of that decision, acknowledge that that's their choice, and the vote is within their community. At the same time, we as a board we do have to sort out what will happen depending upon the outcome of that vote. So hopefully we can get closer to those decisions and come up with a conclusion that satisfies at least most of the parties. So again, thank you for coming this evening, and this meeting is adjourned.